Here we are, ascending. All right. Can everyone hear me? I hope so. So let's begin. My name is Jordan Bass. I'm the managing editor of McSweeney's Quarterly, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the second night of the 8th annual Penn World Voices Festival of International Literature, which we have a great cross-section of here with us tonight. So tonight we'll be discussing and reading from, and maybe even taking some questions about McSweeney's 42, which was dedicated to a project called Multiples. Multiples was an experiment in serial translation conceived of and guest edited by the great Adam Thirlwell, who arrived at the idea after a momentary fit of doubt about the relationship between language and literature. Having realized that believing in the value of literature and translation required one to believe that literature was strong enough to withstand translation, Adam decided to put his faith to the test in the same way you might test a new drug by giving 20 times the normal dosage to a mouse. The idea he presented us with was to investigate what would happen if a story were successively translated by a series of novelists, each one working only from the translation immediately prior to their own. In other words, to find out how the style and voice and meaning of a piece might be altered if, for example, what started out as an essay in Danish by Søren Kierkegaard was first translated into English by Clancy Martin, then into Dutch by Kees Notenboom, then back into English by J.M. Coetzee, then into French, then into English once again, and finally into Swedish. His hypothesis was as follows. The art of the novel is an international art. Its history is international, and the mechanics of this history is translation, which means that the art of fiction, having survived this history, must be tougher than it looks. Adam convinced 61 authors to participate in this experiment, allowing us to traverse 18 different languages, and I think it's fair to say that the results were earth-shaking. You can find a full account in the issue itself, but tonight we're lucky to have with us 4 participants who survived the project. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Wyatt Mason, the contributing editor to Harper's Magazine, Franchesco PFO, the author of The Story of My Purity, Francisco Goldman, the author of Say Her Name, and José Luis Peixoto, the author of The Implacable Order of Things. So we'll hear from all of them reading from the issue, but first we're just going to talk a little bit amongst ourselves about the project. So when Adam first approached you about this, how did you react to this idea, to this hypothesis of Mr. Thirlwell?
Well, good night. First of all, I felt that it was even, I don't remember the word even in any language. It was my duty to defend translation in any way I could. Because being Portuguese, I've depended on translations throughout most of my life. Actually, I've always been interested in languages, and then I developed some knowledge in some languages, but still, I must say that even in the languages that I can speak, I to read the translated, I always prefer to read it in translation, when, of course, I feel that it's a good translation, and if it's up to the name, it's always good. And so, of course, I thought that it was a bit of an insane project, that it was a bit crazy to put it all up and to be in contact with all these authors and all their idiosyncrasies and all their craziness. But it was completely worth it. I mean, it is there. Also, I've known that McSweeney's have been doing things like this for a while, so there is some
Right.
experience
Well, not
in
exactly like
craziness
this.
already also.
I think my first reaction was, oh no, homework. And I couldn't say no to Al, you know. And then obviously when he told me about the project, it sounded completely fascinating. You know, I'm someone who pretty much lives between two languages, and as a writer, especially between two languages. And I've had the often, until recently, dismal experience of seeing, just in the Spanish language, for example, English to Spanish, just how awry translations can go. For instance, when you were writing books in American English, and even about, with characters, as I often do, who speak a Spanish of the Americas, and then your book gets translated into the Spanish of Spain, and it turns into a monstrosity, right? So you're just really aware of what you say the novel. It's very tough, and it certainly is, right? I think Bolaño said one of the marks of a great work of fiction is that it could survive even a bad translation. I don't know, it's not up to me to say whether my book's translated into anagramas, Gachupin, Spanish, needs to have standard, but I've certainly felt wounded by translations and numbers. I was really fascinated by the idea of what these multiple translations were finally going to turn up. And then when I found out I was going to be doing Danilo Keys, he's one of my favorite writers, so I was really intrigued. And I think that's what I most loved about doing this, was I'd never read this story, and I fell in love with it. Became so, and I got to translate directly from a writer who I'll talk about a bit later, Alan Pauls, who I'd never met, but I very much admire. So when I was at first intimidated to think, oh no, Alan Paul's Spanish must be incredible, I'm going to completely massacre it. But it was a fun adventure. Yeah.
I knew Adam first through his second book, a nonfiction book that is called The Delighted States. How many of you know this book? Show of hands, Delighted States. Yes, it was a huge seller. It should have been. It's a very unusual way of looking at literary criticism through translation. And Adam has read seemingly everything. And he just turned, what, 19 or 20?
He's 12 years old.
12 years old. Okay. He's going to be a titan. And it's just this extraordinarily liberal look at how literature works, in the sense that if you reduce translation to two poles of liberality and literality, Adam is at the way, way liberal side of things. He believes, as Bolaño does, that great writing survives any translation. And I was very sympathetic to this. A long time ago, I had a fellowship in the New York Public Library, and I got to handle Nabokov's teaching copies of his texts from when he was at Cornell, which are there in the Berg collection. And he had a copy of the first English translation of Kafka's Metamorphosis. And in his pencil, he'd crossed out every single line in the Metamorphosis and retranslated it line by line. He taught from this, and there were all these curses in the margins about how bad the translator was. And in fact, every book he taught at Cornell, in Proust, in the first volume of In Search of Lost Time, on page 57 of Swann's Way, Nabokov writes, "This translator is insane." So Adam doesn't think translation is insane. He thinks it's the sanest thing in the world. And this project just shows you how insane his sanity is, because very little of this makes any sense as a thing to do, except to show you that, this can be done. It's a function. You can move one language to another language and retain a lot. You also lose a lot. And so this is more kind of a look at unnecessary losses in translation. And it was extremely fun to watch, on the other side of things, yourself translated again and again. And we'll talk a little bit about that, I'm sure, during the course of tonight.
The thing you're going to read from is it's a story by a very obscure, incomprehensible Italian writer named Gadda. that's the cause of all this volume. This is what happened. Adam asked me about this author, and I told him it was untranslatable, and I started ranting about the fact that in Italy it was like everyone respected this author because he made up words, and it's really kind of impossible to understand what he's writing about, and that's a typical old world attitude towards culture, like I don't understand it, so it's good. And actually, I thought that it was a very good writer, because whenever I stopped to analyze a paragraph, the paragraph always had everything. And I started, you know, like obsessing about, I told him about my obsessions about this, and he was equally obsessed by everything he deals with. So we decided to translate this story from the Italian into English on Skype. And we started, like instead of
It's the standard way to do it now, I think. The Skype.
Yeah, for me, translating a story into English, it's a standard way of wasting my time. So I remember these weeks. I don't remember how it took, like it seemed like forever. This could never end. And the problem is that there's words I don't even know what they mean, because this author from the 20th century made up words or picked up words from Lombardy, the region he was from, and he really liked fucking the reader up. And also no one sort of got the joke, because everyone thought that that's a very serious matter of study, like let's try to find out where he found that word. No, he made that up, like it's not important. And so Adam was the perfect ally for this, because he really didn't care for philological certainty. So we decided to just do the same thing that Gadda had done, and just rewrite it in a very bad English that Adam made even worse than my literal translation already was. And I'm just explaining all the words, what they meant, and just say whenever something was unclear, we would just keep it in Lombard. And at the end of it, we gave the translation to a very nice literary review, very respected literary review, and the editor-in-chief said, guys, this is too, I don't remember the words, but the idea was, this is not a very precise thing to do. This is, like, this doesn't make sense. There's no modus operandi, there's no criteria for this. And he said, but that's exactly the point, because Gadda didn't have values in the first place. And this guy said, yeah, so what? So we cannot publish it. And like my reaction was...
so you brought it to McSweeney's after that.
Like my reaction was, I'm bad, I'm very bad, everything I do is wrong. And Adam's reaction was to call McSweeney's and an army of 60 writers to show the other magazine that they were wrong. That's so good.
And they've all banished themselves now. This other magazine,
not really.
Not really. Soon.
I haven't mentioned them because I haven't entirely won. Otherwise, I would have said, yeah, those.
Well, so speaking of philological certainty, Francisco, you mentioned in the issue that you were translating the Spanish version by Alan Pauls, and you actually spent a couple of days trying to figure out the correct meaning of a single word that may have actually been a typo.
You can't really give that away. It's, yeah, well, you know, I knew Argentine Spanish can be much different from Mexican Spanish or Central American Spanish, which are the types of Spanish I'm familiar with. So I came across this sentence. The story that I translate is essentially about a pair of shoes, right? That this guy living up in the garret is completely obsessed with. I'll be reading this story later. At one point he says, the sentence I read was que se parecían unos cadáveres que unos pajarón hubieron materializado hasta los huesos. They looked like cadavers that some pajarón, which sounds like birds, would have martyred down to the bones. Now, when I saw that word, pajarón, I was baffled. First of all, the accent was over in the first syllable, so it's pájaro. But because you know in Spanish the accent in a word that ends in O-N always goes in the last syllable, my mind's eye ignored that accent and immediately turned it into pajarón. Which by itself was mystifying because you would think it would be pajarones, plural. And I thought, well, this must be some kind of Argentine slang word, right? And so I went on to, I wasted days on this. Literally, it drove me mad. I went on to Google, I said, pajarón, you know? And it says, and all it turned up was that in Chile and sometimes in Argentina, a pajarón can be an easily fooled, like a gullible person, or a very easily distracted person, like a space cadet. You know, so it's like they look like some shoes that some easily fooled person would have martyred down to the bone. You know, and I asked my Chilean friends, do you even use this word? Do you know this word? And they'd never heard it, so it's some very archaic form of slang. And then I wrote to some of my friends, around. So it's my friend in Guatemala, Claudia, answered. She said, I didn't even know this, that in Guatemala, un pajarón can be either like a loudmouth or a crybaby. Es un pajarón. No? Or it's like a kind of smock a pregnant woman would wear. And well, none of those made much sense either. So then I was, all right, this must mean like a big bird or something, with some kind of big bird. And I thought, well, maybe like a vulture. So I put in vulture. And then I thought, well, vultures on the Danube, because this all takes place on the Danube. And then, I finally said, well, I don't know, crows martyr things, crows are carnivorous. So I put crows, right? And then I forgot about it, right? And then months later, I was at a book fair in Paris. And it turns out that Alan Pauls and I have the same French publisher. And we were at the book stand together doing a book sign. I said, Alan, I translated your story for that McSweeney's thing, and I was so baffled by this word you used. By now, I totally had forgotten that his version was pajarón, not pajarón, right? And I said, pajarón, what's that? And he looks at me and goes, pajarón? Are you sure? There must be some mistake. I've never heard that word. I said, Alan, I was obsessing on this for days. I know you put pajarón. And when I went back, I sent him the PDF of the version they'd sent me, and he wrote back. It was just a typo. He had merely written pájaros, birds. They looked like the shoes looked like cadavers that some birds would have martyred down to the bone. So in some ways it was fortuitous misreading, because I think I like crows better than birds anyway. So.
Yeah, well, yeah. And Franchesco, I think you're probably our most experienced translator here on stage tonight, our most seasoned translator, maybe in the whole project, out of all 61.
Yeah, we don't have jobs for writers in Italy, and we don't have a market. So I've been translating books from English since...
Yeah, since forever.
Since 10 years ago.
And so in the issue, you said something that I thought was interesting. You said writers are not translators. I don't think they're really interested in meaning. They're more interested in sound, which also means that when they know their writing is being translated, they're obviously more interested in the possibilities of that new language than in the supposed and impossible similarities between that new language and their own.
You read it so slow that it sounds like a very thought out.
Yeah, that's just the speed of my mind.
You just smoothed it. Well, it's true. My editor, my American editor, who's British, is here, and we have spent weeks.
You have a British-American editor.
Yes. I do. very smart and beautiful. And she has this new haircut that she only gets in London.
Where is she? Tell her to stand up.
No, she's in the dark. She's too beautiful. So we were editing the thing.
Yeah.
The thing being my novel.
Right.
And I remember like the translation we were working with. Let's say it was not as funny as my book is in Italian. And very fun. And the jokes didn't quite convey my ability to get laid through jokes. And so, but she's so smart that she could just find the right pitch in English. And I remember wanting to, I hope this is true, that's how I remember it, that wanting to change it, just ask her to find better sounding things. So I'm really in favor of sound, and it's not that writers are like that, I am like that. And translating from English, like you have these people with this boring endless dialogue that you have in British and American fiction with he said, she said. Sometimes I get bored, I don't want to put he said, she said, which sound a bit contrived in Italian. And also there's this, yeah, like you cannot translate them. So I'd rather make up the dialogue. And I think when I'm in touch with the author, now I'm translating John Jeremiah Sullivan's book, for example, and I ask him, like, can I do something else with this? Or do you want to, like, I won't be bothered translating this because it's a 2-word joke that will result in 2 lines of boring explanation. So, I mean, I'd rather ask him or her if they want to have a better sounding thing or a different joke or a different thing.
And Wyatt, is this sort of the school that you subscribe to as well? You said that the key to translation is actually to find a new voice rather than to replicate the voice of the original text.
Yeah, I've translated some older and newer stuff. So when I was translating some essays by 16th century French writer Montaigne, one of the things that I was often asked is how do you capture the flavor of the 16th century? Which sounds really wonderful, but
by not washing, Franchesco says.
That might do it, yeah. My hygiene is already so compromised, I should probably avoid that. But the idea of trying to retain something ancient in something new, translation, in my view, shouldn't be an antiquarian enterprise where you're replicating some, ye olden time, spelled with a Y. I mean, you should translate into your language, and that isn't merely English, that's the English of the present moment. And, Franchesco's translating John Sullivan, whose work you may know, and he's a really wonderful vernacular English writer. He's Southern, but he's wicked educated and has all these very big, complicated words he puts in his essays that are also, interposed with all kinds of profanity.
There's no philological way around, like there's no way to be philological about it.
Right, and so he's very improvisational in his writing, and if you were to be trying to capture the flavor of, his Kentucky boyhood and his, Tennessee university years and his New York, all that stuff, it'd be crazy. You've got to find a language in Italian that's going to make John Sullivan sound like he would if he were an Italian guy in his 30s, writing about now. So, yes, is the answer. I do think that you need to find a voice, and many writers feel this way. One of the contributors to this volume, Javier Marias, who is a superb Spanish author, who translated tons of stuff into Spanish as his apprenticeship. And he says that writers find their voices through translation. And if he ever started an MFA program, which he says he swears he never will ever do, he said it would just be a school of translation, because you find your voice by moving through another voice. And so it's kind of, translation is really high-end impressions, I guess.
And Jose, you said in the issue that translation actually struck you as a very human activity, that you sort of saw it and
I think it makes a lot of sense to when speaking about translation to speak about voices, actually, because I don't know if you noticed, but when we speak a different language, our own voice actually sounds different. I mean,
Do you like pitch or?
Yeah, there is a different tone. I mean, if we get to read in 2 different languages, you'll see that it's the same person reading, but the voice actually has a different sound. It's an actual thing. It's there.
The muscles you use to speak different languages are different. I know
Yeah.
that when I was living in France, the first 6 months I was there, my jaw was
Yeah.
incredibly tired every day because you're going and all the stuff that you just don't have those vowels in English. And you're just like,
Yeah. And so, I mean, but even when writing, you always debate yourself with your own voice. I mean, in thinking about the question of voice is in a way the question of identity, and you always, when writing, face the limits, the frontiers of your own voice, and you always have inner debates about the tones that you choose, about what is it possible to say with your voice, and I would say that a lot of the questions that translations raise are the same as writing raises, because translation is an act that we do even as we write, because we are also translating something into something. We are also turning one material into another, and also we do that a lot, even when not writing in our daily lives.
Well, great. So I think we'll hear some readings now from the issue, and I think we'll start right here with my iPhone emerging from my pocket, and Franchesco PFO, let's see here, reading from The Fire on Chance Street, which was your co-translation that you mentioned.
Prove your point. I'm going to read a few lines in Italian and then change.
You don't have to change your face.
Just the
voice. Don't change the face.
There'll be an outfit.
Shave,
There'll be
right?
an outfit change.
Speakers, these are all made up words. Se ne raccontavano di cotte e di crude sul fuoco del numero 14, ma la verità è che neppure Sua Eccellenza Filippo Tommaso Marinetti avrebbe potuto simultanare quel che accadde in 3 minuti dentro la ululante topaia, come subito invece gli riuscì fatto al fuoco, che ne disprigionò fuori a un tratto tutte le donne che ci abitavano seminude nel Ferragosto e la loro prole globale, fuori dal tanfo e dallo spavento repentino della casa, poi diversi maschi, poi alcune signore povere, e al dir d'ognuno alquanto malandate in gamba. It's very old Italian. It's
Everyone
fascist.
follow that? It's good.
If you don't, now just the gestures.
And now I'm reading from Adam Tewell's made-up English with an Italian accent. How many? 10 minutes?
Yeah, 5 or 10 minutes. So we'll just take it as it goes. Oh, really?
Okay, you tell me when.
Okay.
You want me to do that?
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
strike you over the table.
Okay. This is a story that is mimicking the fascist aesthetic of Futurismo. Okay, so it has all this weird imagination of fire and things crumbling down. People came up with 1001 stories about the fire at number 14, which wasn't so strange since not even the late New York hipster Gordon Matta Clark could have blown up that wailing tenement as comprehensively as the fire did in the course of its 3-minute happening, which evicted from the building's exploding garbage and fear in no particular order. 1. All the women in there semi-naked because of the heat and a global array of their offspring. Then 2. Several males. Then 3. Some sad old women who were, in the words of one dispassionate bystander, a little unsteady on their legs. who entered the scene all bony and
Disheveled, yes.
disheveled, in white lace night dresses, rather than as usual neatly and soberly arranged for the performance of their locomotions toward the Baptist church. Then 4, some gentlemen who were themselves a little, how to put this, patched up. Then 5, Anacarsi Rotunno, an international poet who will never be mentioned again. And then 6, the care worker for the ailing anarchist on the 5th floor. Then 7, Henderson with the little girl and the parrot. Then 8, that kid called Flowers in his underwear and in his arms, Mrs. Maldifassi, who looked like the Lord of the fucking Flies was trying to personally remove her pantyhose. She was screaming so much. And then finally, among the continuing cries, anguishes, tears, children's screams, and heartbroken shouts and random landings and bundles of stuff thrown to safety from the windows, when you could already hear the firemen arriving at top speed, and 2 vans were already emptying themselves of some fat police beside the high-speed ambulance, the entire state's security, yes, finally 9, from 2 windows at the right-hand side of the 3rd floor, and also one on the 4th, the fire managed in what was a really terrifying entrance to free its very own flames, its tongues, in staccato intervals, serpentine and red, which appeared and disappeared, along with black tortiglioni of smoke, black and greasy like some over-barbecued possum, which were libidinously morulating into spheres and multispheres, or to put it less scientifically, folks, were like the intrafolding coils of a black rat snake, sliding out from the undergrowth and the underworld among the lurid magnesium flares, and also burning farfalloni, perhaps paper, or more likely fabric or burnt pagamoid, went fluttering across the smoke-blackened sky over the terror of those Mrs. and Misters and Mrs., some of them barefoot in the dust of the fucked-up street, others in their puffball slippers, oblivious to the piss and dog shit over the shrieks and weepings of their infinite babies. These women, who could already feel their heads and their hair impart their sperms, erupt into a horrifying live flame. Take a look, panoramic reader. You made up so much shit. I was just providing the literal translation. There were sirens already waiting on top of chimneys and nearby factories to the terrified sky, and this crypto-symbolic electric composition harmonized with the women's desperate cries of anguish. From the flung open doors of distant fire stations escaped high-speed fire trucks, prompt and rapid impulses ready to overcome any problem the flames could pose them, while the final fireman of the 5th unit, with a leap, managed with his left hand to grab the last iron of the ladder rest at the end of the ladder that was already turning out of the door, and vice versa with his right was still buttoning the buttons of his fireman's jacket. I don't understand this. While to come back to Earth, the unperfumed dreaminess of what are laughably called motorists, who happily kneecap patient and lame geriatrics, whose interior is a languid drowsiness of MP3s and aircon, while their exterior is crazed and murderous, lighting up street corners on their way out to the more metroland sidewalks of this metropolis, was at last blockaded by these electric and premonitory tones, followed simultaneously by the transversal advent of the sirens. It was like that Saul Steinberg print where the sirens are a repeat of vowels coming from the squad car. Do you get it, hipsters? A happening is an assemblage of events performed or perceived in more than one time and place. So, okay, Alan Caparel, merci, monsieur, but it ends up looking like this. A three-year-old girl, Berenice, the only daughter of Mr. Saul Smith, Esquire, home alone with her parrot, on the high chair into which she'd been heaved and then imprisoned, was crying desperately for her mama without being able to get down, and fat tears like harlequin pearls were dripping and descending over her cheeks in pursuit of the soak-wet bib mechanically scribbled with "Got pizza?" until they drowned in the messy mash of a lukewarm milk, where little by little she'd soaked an entire loaf of sliced white bread and a few chocolate biscuits that might have been Oreos or just those strange kind of tea time wafers, but which were 3 years old themselves, I'm sure of that. "Mama, mama," she shouted in terror, while at the far corner of the table sat a multicolored bird with a Roman nose of a beak, who kind of liked when he saw what he saw in the mirror, this bird, this arrogant bird, who glow and simper as soon as the kids called his name, "Sneakers, Sneakers." But that is not then, some sort of hopeless melancholy and lethargy would take hold of him, and so that inside him we'd, "Hey Sneakers, sing! Come on, sing! Bad romance! Hey Dumba Sneakers!" And on hearing that sing, he'd riposte with a gentle gargle of "just fucking self." But now, poor creature, there was to be no fucking self. It's true that, without it causing him undue alarm, a certain hint of burnt matter had been already sensed by his perceptual apparatus. But when he saw those petals diagonally enter the open window and then travel through the room with their sinister magic, like so many burning bats, and start lapping at the shreds of the frazzled upholstery and the yellow blind, its sash slats rolled up with some threadbare cords in its box. Then he too began to squawk from the hollow of his throat, a range of random noises on repeat, as if he were a radio, and he skittered scared and fearful toward the girl, with abrupt motions, cut off every time, after half a meter of straining, by the inexorable malice of the little chain that was keeping him linked to his perch. I can't do more.
Excellent. So I think we'll jump over Wyatt momentarily and proceed to Franchesco Goldman, who's going to be reading his translation of a translation of a translation of a story by Danilo Kiss.
We were Francisco and Franchesco. All we need is the Pope.
That's right. The Pope could not make it tonight.
Francisco trio. Now, I was just reflecting too, we talked about a bit, that in a way the problems that you face sometimes in translation, whether you're translating from a text or translating from the language spoken around you into the language you're writing in, are the most imaginatively challenging, I think, in all writing. Right? Think about this, whether you're translating from a made-up language. I think the challenges of translating, for instance, from Mexico City vernacular into English or some other language is the same as translating from a made-up language. It just astonishes me all the time. I was thinking today, like, how would you translate something like into English? It's one of the most common things you'll hear people say in Mexico City, and there's so many words like this, right? Like, how did it go for you last night? Oh, pasamos de huevos. Right? Oh, it was eggs. Right? Which means you had a really great time, right? How would you translate that? You can't just go, we had a really great time. You have to find something that is as vernacular, as crazy, right? Or, te cargó el payaso.
Waffles.
Right? Te cargó el payaso. The clown lifted you, right? O me cargó el payaso. It means you're really fucked. Right? You're screwed. Like, how are you gonna, the clown lifted me. It was like, oh, I'm sorry. And one of the things, and sometimes they're more subtle than that. I was just recently teaching Savage Detectives to class I teach up here. And I was just so amazed. It's so simple. But I just couldn't get over it. The more I thought about it, the more impressed I was with the genius of Natasha Wimmer's translation in Savage Detectives of the character's name, Piel Divina, divine skin, right? She chose luscious skin for Piel Divina. When you thought about it, because everyone in the book fetishizes his skin, he's like the one, he's from Oaxaca, he's the one Aztec blooded, Indian blooded character really, and you know that skin he has, it's just so satiny brown, beautiful, and then you see how all the other characters fetishize it almost, right? His lovers, and you think of how deeply Mexican that is, and it was just such a brilliant choice. And I said, that wouldn't have occurred to me in a million years, So I think that poetic creativity of the great translators is just phenomenal. you know, and I'm going to read this story by Neil Peace, and I hope I do it minimal justice because it's such a beautiful story. My shoes. My shoes, lying one against the other like two animals, had grown horribly elongated and deformed, like objects that we look at every day for years until suddenly, for no particular reason, perplexingly, we see them for the first time. Of course, that sensation, seeing something as for the first time, didn't surprise or frighten me. A previous experience came to my aid. I remembered the cash register in the bar where for years I used to drink in the afternoons. For starters, if somebody had asked me if there was a cash register in that bar, never mind what it was like, I would have said no, or just shrugged. And so, one autumn afternoon, after waiting 3/4 of an hour for Lillian, who had said she'd be a little late, I went to that bar. I picked it especially for an encounter, a matter of shelter in case of a storm, and though I never would have admitted this in front of Lillian, if she didn't show up, I'd settle in there as in a purgatory, and sat in a corner with a double cognac. And then, once I understood that she wasn't coming that night, tormented by jealousy and doubt, my spirit grasping for a lifeline, my eyes fell on the things around me. At first, it seemed to be happening without any intervention of consciousness, which was occupied with more important matters than a plain old iron cash register. But, as you'll soon see, there was far more lucidity and decisiveness in my vacant gaze than there'd been in the casual inspection I'd made of the little bar while anxiously waiting for Lillian. For as absorbed as I was in thinking about her, I noticed, following a flowing tributary of consciousness, that I was seeing that old cash register for the first time. Its protruding nickel top, sculpted like domes and reliefs, gave it the look of a cathedral. That idea intrigued me. My torment and suffering weren't interrupted or diminished, but I did note that the discovery of the cash register cathedral was nothing but a consequence of the alienation of my spirit, which in that moment of excitement grieved what complacency had prevented me from seeing before, revealing it as necessary, as both refuge and armor. In reality, there was nothing necessary about that antiquated cash register, apart maybe from the fact that my spirit, in a moment of weakness, had fastened itself to such a vulgar object. Experience told me that there was nothing strange about that. It had happened more than once that while disinterestedly observing, in a state, so to speak, of absence, a face that I saw day to day and had long registered, I'd suddenly comprehended. So, to get back to my story, I looked with surprise at my shoes in the dark light of the moon, and it was as if, for the first time, I'd tripped over something whose sense and purpose I couldn't understand. Back then, I lived in a garret, and I'd dream while awake. I slept on the floor miserably about Paris and the books I was going to write, books in which my entire past and present would surrender to the grace of creation. That little room in a mansard roof had an amazing power of derangement, almost magical. By night, in that room illuminated by a tiny lamp, as happens at twilight by the light of the moon, not just objects underwent strange metamorphosis, my thoughts did too, becoming fantastic and amorphous. The detail that distracted me from the object in question, the fact that I was sleeping on the floor, wasn't without importance in this deranging process. Lying on the floor, I saw the things surrounding me from a perspective that substantially altered their appearance. I saw the chair as it was hung from the ceiling, and the window as if it was in some higher imaginary floor. In a word, I saw from the point of view of a frog, which made everything acquire an air of practically malignant superiority. My shoes threw a long shadow, as if standing on their toes, although I could see them flat on the floor in front of me. But that strange pair of animals weren't the same size, and it seemed to me that while they were parallel like that, one next to the other, any optical illusion should be impossible. They differed in size in the same way that certain male animals differ from the females. One lifted its head as if on guard, the other just a little behind it seemed imperturbable. For a moment I wanted to believe they were two black cats whose presence disturbed me, because they weren't docile. They dragged themselves toward me with shining eyes and fangs like daggers, even as they approached without reducing the distance between us. I finally convinced myself that they were nothing more than my worn-out shoes. And at the same time, I had to convince myself that I just now perceived them, not as objects, but as creatures of some kind, creatures I had no relationship to. I tried as hard as I could to recognize myself in that dark, amorphous lump, to identify my own shape or any other relation to me that would allow me to comprehend those shoes. I only remember that I'd bought them not long ago, though I'd worn them immediately to wander the city outskirts in search of stimulus, and that their tight fit gave me some brutal blisters, a torment I freed myself from with a quick remedy, making 2 cuts with a knife over the toes where the blisters were, and opening 2 holes to alleviate the pressure. That reminded me that I'd been at war with those shoes as soon as I'd encountered them, even before encountering them. Just the idea of having to buy them had unsettled and frightened me, given that new shoes have always tortured me like Inquisition boots, bloodying my heels. But then I thought it over. But when I thought it over, I felt that I was being rancorous and unjust. Because if I wanted to, if I didn't give in to my self-mortifying nature, I could also recall a few agreeable moments. I bought them at once, without telling Lillian that I was planning to acquire some new shoes. It's true, she was always trying to act as if it didn't bother her to go out with me when I hadn't shaved, with my Charlie Chaplin shoes. On the contrary, she said she liked it because her father thought I was an artist, which flattered her. But she couldn't get me to accompany her to the theater or to a concert. There was no way to convince her that I couldn't go to the theater or to a concert like that is, with shoes like those. She began to accuse me of not wanting to go to concerts because of her, while I insisted that I couldn't go with her, but I could go alone. I was afraid you were going to buy the flat and crushed looking kind, because I know you don't like pointy shoes, but these are nice. Tomorrow we'll go to the theater. I want to see behind the closed doors, she explained, looking at my feet, saying it all breezily, as it was obvious that now we'd be going to the theater. I'm going to cut them up, I said, as calmly as her. I'm going to give them a cesarean. I can't stand them anymore. She was fiercely opposed, of course, as it was a question of life and death, because she knew that I was willing to do it. Then we parted. She insisted that I was looking for an excuse not to take her to the theater. I began to remember all those moments that connected me to the shoes that now loomed over me from a corner, projecting their long and strangely intricate shadow over the floor. And finally, after remembering our many walks with Lillian, when we'd wandered the shores of the Danube and gone into those suburban bars to dance absurd calypsos among the regulars and prostitutes, our moments of passion in the cold garret, where we shook off our shoes without turning on the lights and gave each other over to mute embraces that left us breathless. As the municipal hall clock announced the hour of her departure, and we hurriedly groped in the dark for our shoes, I decided to get up and turn on the light to be able to draw in charcoal those monstrous shoes that so suddenly could become a world unto themselves, a truly distant and deformed world, but that through a bit of effort and will could appear nearby and coherent. I assumed that Van Gogh-like charcoal would play the role of mediator and give some meaning to those shoes that had originally struck me as so strange, dangerous, and alien. Afterward, once I'd succeeded in relating them to Lillian in my memory, they became familiar, as a world of reminiscences had come to wander in them. I wanted to save them from oblivion, embalm them like a saint's relic, or like the hand of an idealistic martyr, now that the world had rested upon and inside of them. Now that the world that rested upon them and inside of them was revealed to me, this dark garret, my suburban wanderings with Lillian, and everything else that would end up in the trash unless I rescued those shoes from oblivion. So I set about, somnambulant and dreamy, to prepare the paper and charcoal and proceed with the embalming. Wrapped in rags and a ragged military blanket, like a shaman from a savage tribe in his ritual attire, I moved through the weak light and approached the shoes as if performing a sacrament. Seen from above, they were poor-looking things, dusty, ruined, deformed, like cadavers that a few crows had martyred down to the bones. I picked them up gingerly, by the fingers, only to immediately let them drop, horrified. A rat slithered out of one of the shoes, and with its long, dirty trail, traced an imaginary diagonal from one corner to another and went down a hole, erasing in just one motion all that was to be saved for oblivion.
All right, and so now we'll jump back to Wyatt Mason, I think. Maybe we'll comment you there. Mr. Mason now reading his translation of a translation of a translation of a translation.
Yes.
Of a story originally in Hungarian.
Yes. Hungarian speakers in the audience. So when I say that that story was written by Laszlo Krasny-Horke, no one will know that I've mispronounced that terribly. Yeah. I've actually never heard it said, I just made that up. It's interesting, Franchesco, you actually translated a typographically wrong word the right way. You translated it as crows, and it was birds, right?
Alan Paul's and had birds.
Right,
Yeah.
but you ended up with crows.
Right.
And so even though you didn't know the word, you got it right beforehand, because you went with crows before you got in touch with them, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so translation works. Even
Here we
with
go.
typos.
We solved it.
Translation works, that's what matters. Okay, so this is a story that he wrote in Hungarian, and I can't find in the volume, but here it is. Great. He wrote it in Hungarian. They did not reproduce the Hungarian version because he translated it into German. So we don't know what the original story looks like at all. But I don't read German, and I did plug this into that most dependable resource, Google Translate. And interestingly enough, the next translation, which is into English poetry by Lawrence Norfolk, does seem to track very closely to the original meaning in the, not original, but the translation of the Hungarian. Then, from there it goes into French, the French of Florian Zeller, which he translates this from the English poem of Lawrence Norfolk, which is, okay, apologies to the German speakers, the original translation is called ze Ruke Güge Winnen, of course, which Lawrence Norfolk translates into the frightful hunt. And that becomes, in French, Bonduzi. And I'm going to just read a little bit of the beginning in French, which seems to depart radically from the English poem. C'était dans une maison très ancienne qui menaçait de s'écrouler à tout moment. Je suis monté au 2e étage sur la pointe des pieds pour ne pas être responsable d'un tel événement. J'ai toujours eu horreur de me faire remarquer. Mais j'ai manqué de cette même précaution en refermant la porte des toilettes derrière moi. Le mécanisme semblait abîmé, comme si la chaleur extrême avait dilaté les gonds ou le cadre de la porte. Et j'ai dû la forcer un peu pour qu'elle ne reste pas en vous. Yeah, and that's where we'll stop. Because, yeah. All right, so I'm actually going to read you, not my translation, I'm going to read you the beginning of the final translation before I read mine. Because mine into English from the French goes into Spanish, and then it goes back into English. The Spanish is by Rodrigo Frezan, who translates Dennis Johnson.
I'm not Spanish.
I just really needed your support because this is our common law volume. It seemed like, yeah.
I loved your Parisian accent.
Thanks.
I was just,
is that what that was?
I was just looking at you.
My jaw hurts. Yeah, I don't know why. Okay. So Sarah Manguso translated this as killing time from the Haciendo Tiempo of Rodrigo Frezan. But you're Portuguese, there's nothing helpful here. All right. So Sarah's begins 1, cold. At any moment, the house is going to come down. To prevent such an event, I could be blamed. I'll descend the stairs on tiptoe. I never wanted to draw attention to myself. My choice all my life has been to pass like a shadow through the dying morning of civilization, sneak like a ghost through the empty highways and back roads in our brief trip between coming and going. So that's how Sarah's begins. when I read the French, which I've got to say as a story makes no sense at all, in that it's basically the story of a crap someone takes in a house that's falling down. That's as best I can tell. And it's not confusing, it's confusing that that's what it's about. And that does not seem to be what his in German through Google Translate is about. It's definitely
Does he
not,
know about this?
he does now. Okay. So when I was reading the French, it sounded very pretentious to me, and it reminded me of something that a British friend of mine had said to me when I visited him when he was studying at Oxford, and I was living in France. I was telling him about how great France was, and he looked at me for a while patiently, and then at a certain point he said, and this is totally caricaturial, he doesn't talk this way at all, he said,
you know, it's very interesting. The French, it seems like everything they say is about philosophy, and they're very proud of it. They say, you know, philosophiquement, je pense que... And, you know, a British person would say, you know, they would never do that. They would say something like, if they had to use the word philosophical, they would say something like, well, you know, I feel very strongly that this is something that we must think about because, philosophically, sorry.
Wait, it gets worse. So here's the thing. When I was reading this French, all I could think of was Tom talking about pretentiousness and all that. Because it just felt really just like grandiose and just a lot was being made out of a guy taking a crap, and it didn't seem to be ironic. So I was sitting on my couch with my girlfriend and a bottle of wine, and she speaks French, and so I had delayed Adam's request quite a long time because I wasn't looking forward to translating this pretentious story about a crap. And so finally, you know, deadlines being what they are, very stimulating eventually, I translated Bonduzi as Band USA. And
It's a place.
On se dit, hein, c'est un endroit. Philosophiquement, c'est
Moi, je
vrai.
pense que...
Sorry. So, this is how it came out, and the thing is, I was having a bad time until I remembered Tom. And this goes back to the idea of finding a voice for a translation. Okay. So, we did this together, my girlfriend Hannah and I, and just did it aloud, and this is what it sounded like. Because we sat down and did it. The first part, 1, constipated.
The house was on the brink of collapse. To avoid the miserable eventuality that I might be held accountable, I tiptoed discreetly upstairs. I've never wanted to stand out. No. My preference throughout life is to pass like a shade through the dim mornings of civilization, to steal like a ghost through the highways and the byways of our brief transit between one advent and one last. Alas, I had to slam the bathroom door behind me like some dim brute. The whole thing, frame, jam, lock, latch. It had been cooked in the heat, like cassoulet. The door had swollen on its hinges like a terribly unfortunate little lamb that perished by the seaside in the Falklands. And in the heat, became a sad little quadrupedal balloon, hoofed and fuzzy. Horrors, I say. The door simply wouldn't close without force. The sound was terrible, heavy and dark, like a human body falling, hitting cold tile from a great, great height. It scared me to the point where, I confess, I experienced what I hesitate to call, well, a lack of control. Oh dear, my bowels. What was I to do? I didn't lock it, oh dear. The lock was falling apart too, which didn't make me feel any better. Oh dear. So, I assumed the obvious position. Of athwart the yawning basin. And athwart the yawning basin. And couldn't help but fear the worst. Buried alive, like a miner in a mine. A deep, dark, dank, and in all likelihood Chilean mine. I agree that that's funny, I have no idea why. As a child, this had been my recurring nightmare. I made my mother promise that were I to expire before the first light of morning, its lemony rays gilding my soft downy cheeks and nature's wet, hot, matutinal bisou, she'd settle me into my eternal resting place, my sorry crypt, with, why yes, of course, a cell phone. She shrugged her shoulders. My dear boy, what leads you to such flights of whimsy? Why can't you just play... Why can't you just play kick the hobo in the street with the rest of the lads? Well, the poor woman, she failed to appreciate the early quavers of the artistic temperament, the early throbs of genius. For were I pronounced dead in error, I would be but a few agile thumbstrokes away from my salvation. Eventually I wore my dim mom down, and she promised. I learned our number by heart, tattooing it, as it were, on my soul, and my grandmother's too, on my soul, that is, in case our phone, not our soul, was busy. The loo was entirely dark. It's short, it's almost done. Only the meagerest of ribbons of light threaded through the green shutters, the tiniest of promises. One would have supposed one was on the other side of the world. I'm destroying the mic. Don't bogart the mic. One would have supposed one was on the other side of the world. Oh, is that it? I keep doing that? Thank you very much. All right. The loo was entirely dark. Only the meagerest of ribbons of light threaded through the green shutters, the tiniest of promises. One would have supposed that one was on the other side of the world, at the border of some uncharted desert, a domain of endless suffering, unceasing toil, unending pain. To ram the point home, postcards of paradisical lands, tropical wonderments, were affixed to the dark wall. Whither their lever? Their edges, those of the cards, I mean, had yellowed, their recipients no doubt buried in the sands of the past, their senders turned to dust as inexorably as those stone monuments left by heathens of the great forgotten continent of Marakara. Heaven seemed a kind of hell, or so I was given to think. Joy flees. 2. Adam braided. Suddenly, I heard something on the landing. Someone was coming, and I remembered that I hadn't locked the door. After thinking that I wouldn't be able to leave this place, now I was afeared that someone would see me baking, as it were, a loaf. And I couldn't imagine having to deal with some miscreant's miscast look, as if it had walked in upon an idiot of yore, humping a heifer on a heath, the queer mischief obscured by a rising mist. So naturally I turned on the faucet, as one does. The water would alert them absolutely of my presence within. No, I'm not touching it.
This is a sign from God that I'm creating an abomination to mankind. Yeah.
The water would alert them absolutely of my presence within. No one would dare trespass without knocking. I could, like a great sow, wallow in the brack of my solitary guilt. And then a changed bristled bower, an undying fount of purity that flowed through the demon dark. The postcards, in contrast to the giddy fountain, seemed embalmed. They advertised fallen empires devoured by time, paradise lost. My attention drifted from faucet to cards, from cards to faucet, dizzy, and this strange oscillation carried me like a magic carpet. I recalled another fountain in Bandusia, pronunciation according to the editor's banned USA, which you find in one of Horace's odes. I think that's true. I had always considered it to be a place where all thirsts were quenched, no matter their ardor. I see an animal on a hill that has just drunk its fill. This creature could have been any one of us. And why not, for example, a, so to say, tiny piglet, a tiny albino piglet, finding its ease in the cool of this paradise, found. Whence came this idol, this, as it were, postcard, one unmolested by time, the reaper? How many years has it been since I imbibed these verses? Had I even read Horace? His lines foundered in the warm waters of my memory alongside those Latin lyrics that had been my dreary duty to translate on école. I didn't comprehend a word of it, I should say. Poetry has always been a foreign language to me, a lingua not franca, so what. A snake's tongue, ho-ho. I stumbled over every word, meaning always eluding me, and I pitied the mendicant friar, who made me suffer so, and whom, or so I swore, I'd one day hunt down, bind, and destroy. 4. Liberated. Whoa! I think I just gave birth, boy! Nailed it! All I have to do now is wash my stinking mitts, shut the faucet, and punch open the door so as I can hook back up with my crew in the drawing room, like nothing went down, except that fucking big loaf. That's not American, that's French. Yeah. That fucking big loaf I dropped. I mean, Jesus, why the fuck was I acting like such a mook? The fucking footsteps? Forget about it. Wasn't nobody there. It's just me and my prick on the 3rd floor of this fucking castle. Anyway, that shit about the fountain in my mind box. Fuck if I know what that was. Anyway, here's what it is. Gotta admit, my heart was acting like a pussy, making me want to reach out and grab it like some fucking little kid hoping to get a grip on his pop's hand. But Jesus, it was a fucking faucet. I'm such a dick when I need to take a crap. I mean, I needed a fucking drink. Not a drink from a fucking faucet. And that poem? What the fuck? Douchebag alert. Like a poem was gonna help nobody. Anywho, like there are answers to questions, huh? My heart's the answer, fucked up as it is. Might as well get up from this crapper and wash my mitts. I can barely feel a fucking thing anyway. Who the fuck knows what it means? Past life bullshit? Poof, there it goes. Those friggin' postcards, the fucking water, that albino piggy, arty-farty crapola. All it makes me feel is more alone. I'm done. Rest is dregs. My boys is waiting. Flush that fucking thing. It's daylight already. Some kid's running in the street. So there's that. Run, jump, swim. Look at the moon, sunsets, seas. What we've got, what we lose. It's done.
That was tremendous. Thank you.
Sorry.
We are going to have to take you on the road with that one, I think.
One time only.
One time only. One time only, everybody. We're a lucky few here to have received that. And we've reached Jose now, who will be, he's sort of at the farthest extent of our project. He's going to be reading a translation of 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 a story originally in Russian.
And I don't know much of Russian. I'll start by reading the translation of a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation done by Ivan Vladislavich. And that's the translation that I translated from. It's so nice to say the verb translate. Like. Tango. When the woman upstairs comes home, I'm waiting at my own front door. Anna de la Roche. That's what it says on her letterbox in the lobby. Her heels click on the parquet. I have carpets on my floor, but even so, I always put on slippers to spare the downstairs neighbors. I'm doubly considerate. Anna de la Roche, not at all. She drops her handbag in the hallway, and I can't help looking up at the ceiling. The clicking of her heels sounds like the ratchet of a little engine in my pelvis. It sets me in motion. Now she's on her way to the liquor cabinet, and I go too, not so much in her footsteps, but as under her heels. Before I bought this place, my friend Gretchen, who knows the apartment lifestyle, advised me to come here in the evening to make sure it wasn't noisy. People are at work during the day, she said. It's what they get up to at night that will annoy you. I shouldn't have scoffed at the idea. In an apartment building, the soundtrack is everything. When my neighbor on the left grinds his coffee beans in the morning, I fancy I can smell the aroma and it perks me up. The genteel squeaking of bed springs from the Van Blerks, my neighbors on the right, reassures me. But Anna de la Roche overhead drives me mad. Every now and then I find a carrot in my letterbox. A pale, fibrous root vegetable, the sort of thing you would feed a pony at the petting zoo. Is she behind this? I've convinced myself she is. I buy my groceries at the bargain center down the road. They made some alterations there once, tried to dress it up as a mall, but it's still just a neighborhood shopping center with a dozen shops on 2 stories. I was talking to Manny dos Santos, who has the chocolate shop on the top floor. I said I was surprised to see his business thriving in the recession. Surely chocolates are a luxury. Manny is our amateur philosopher, and he welcomes every opportunity to teach me something about the world. It seems there are layers to the bargain center that I have never perceived. Strata is the word he used. The poorer people from the surrounding suburbs walk in off the street on the ground floor. That's why the bottle store is down there, and the keg and tankard, and the tote? T-O-T-E. Also the barber shop and the burger joint. The richer people, I noticed that he said richer and poorer rather than rich and poor, but even so I was hurt. Drive up the ramp at the side of the building to the elevated parking garage, and they walk in on the top floor. That way the housewives aren't pestered by the men outside the pub and don't have trouble pushing their trolleys back to their cars. The shops on the top floor have more class, he said. Besides the grocer, there's the florist and the dry cleaner, the delicatessen and the coffee shop. Of course, said Manny, these 2 strata are connected. The poorer people come up here for bread and milk, and then they go back down again and out into the street. And a man like you will go downstairs for a bottle of wine and then come up again and buy a dozen roses for his wife, get into his car and drive away. The way Manny explained it, the bargain center suddenly looked like a computer graphic, a vivid economic model of our unequal society. Tonight, again, Anna de la Roche is dancing. I would like to go upstairs, of course, but I am merely a footnote in her story, a volunteer in slippers. My part is to follow her lead, here below, and not stand on her toes. Now the translation of the translation of the translation 6 times. Tango. Quando a mulher do andar de cima chega à casa, estou à espera, à minha porta. Ana de la Roche. É isso que está escrito na caixa do correio à entrada do prédio. Os seus saltos repenicam no soalho. Tenho alcatifas, mas ainda assim uso sempre chinelos para poupar os vizinhos de baixo. Tenho dupla consideração. Ana de la Roche não tem nenhuma. Pôs a mala na entrada de casa. Não consigo impedir um olhar para o teto. O repenicar dos sapatos parece o matraquear de um pequeno motor no meu pelvis, põe-me em movimento. Agora vai a caminho do armário das bebidas e eu vou também, não tanto a seguir-lhe os passos como por baixo deles. Antes de comprar, a minha amiga Gretchen, que conhece este tipo de apartamentos, aconselhou-me a vir de noite para garantir que não era barulhento. As pessoas trabalham durante o dia, disse ela. É o que fazem à noite que te irá incomodar. Eu não devia ter rejeitado logo a ideia. Num edifício de apartamentos, a banda sonora é tudo. Quando o meu vizinho da esquerda moe os seus grãos de café de manhã, acho que sou capaz de sentir o aroma e isso desperta-me. O chiar cordial das molas da cama de Van Blacks, o meu vizinho da direita, reconforta-me, mas a Ana de La Roche, por cima, enlouquece-me. De vez em quando encontro uma cenoura na minha caixa do correio, a palidez e a fibra de uma planta, o tipo de coisa que se daria a um pônei na quinta pedagógica. Ela estará por detrás disto? Convenci-me a mim próprio que sim. Compro as minhas mercearias no pequeno centro comercial ao fundo da rua. Uma vez fizeram lá umas modificações, tentaram disfarçá-lo de hipermercado, mas continuou a ser um centro comercial de bairro, com 2 andares e uma dúzia de lojas. Estava a falar com Manny dos Santos, que tem a loja de chocolates no andar de cima. Disse-lhe que estava surpreendido por ver o seu negócio a prosperar durante a recessão. Os chocolates são de certeza um luxo. Manny é o nosso filósofo amador e aproveita cada oportunidade para me ensinar algo sobre o mundo. No centro comercial, parece que há camadas em que nunca reparei. Strata foi a palavra que usou. As pessoas mais pobres dos subúrbios envolventes chegam da rua e entram para o resto de chão. É por isso que a loja de bebidas é lá em baixo e também o bar e o restaurante de fast food. Também o barbeiro e a tasca dos hambúrgueres. As pessoas mais ricas, reparei que ele disse mais ricas e mais pobres e não apenas ricas e pobres, mas mesmo assim fiquei sentido. Conduzem pela rampa ao lado do edifício para o estacionamento superior e entram pelo andar de cima. Dessa maneira, as donas de casa não são perturbadas pelos homens à porta do pub e não têm dificuldade em empurrar os carrinhos de compras até aos seus carros. As lojas no andar de cima têm mais classe, disse ele. Para além da mercearia, há a florista e a limpeza a seco, a charcutaria e o café. Está claro, disse Mandy, estes 2 stratas estão ligados. As pessoas mais pobres vêm cá acima buscar pão e leite e voltam lá para baixo onde saem para a rua. Um homem como tu vai lá abaixo buscar uma garrafa de vinho, volta a subir para comprar uma dúzia de rosas para a sua esposa, entra no carro e vai-se embora. Da maneira como o Manny explicou, o pequeno centro comercial parecia de repente um gráfico de computador, um vívido modelo económico da nossa sociedade desigual. Esta noite, Ana de La Roche está a dançar outra vez. É claro que eu gostaria de ir lá acima, mas sou apenas uma nota de rodapé na sua história, um voluntário de chinelos. O meu papel é seguir a sua dança, aqui em baixo, sem a pisar.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Francisco and Wyatt and Franchesco. I fear we may have used up our time with those wonderful readings, but I don't know, it's my first Penn International Festival of Letters, but thank you so much for joining us. The anthem. If everyone will rise and we'll sing the anthem in Hungarian first. But well, that was just terrific. It was so exciting to hear those. Thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight.